I'm going to show you how I cook brisket. I had a viewer recently look at one of my videos and put in a request for brisket, so that's what we're going to cook today, brisket. And so Stephen, this one's for you, buddy. Now I've thought about doing a video on brisket before, and you know, you can go on YouTube and everything I cook you can find on YouTube with all kinds of detail and stuff like that. And so I thought about it. You know, that's really why I hadn't made a brisket video. I was hoping not to bore people, but when I really think about it, brisket's a perfect thing to do a video on, and I'll tell you why. You know, it's one thing to show recipes and how you cook stuff, but this is a perfect meat for me to talk about the process of cooking. You know, you've got your spices and all that stuff for flavor, and you know, depending on whose palate you're trying to hit, you know, your spices are all adjustable, but the process of getting it right, it really gets down into chemistry. You know, I tell people when it comes to, I tell them with barbecue, but really cooking in general, all these same rules apply. You know, the process, if it's done right, it's going to take as long as it takes. Recipes are a combination of ingredients and process. It's easy to look at a recipe and follow it to the T and still not get the end product that you think you should get. And that always happens because you don't really understand the process. That's just a guideline. You got to know the process of, you know, yeah, you want this tender, but what makes it tender? What's going on to get it to be tender? So that way you know how to hit your marks. It's not so scientific that you can just write down specific instructions. So the brisket's a great one because it's not an easy to cook piece of meat. You know, you can put it on there and you can get it done. You can get it tender, but the end product, by the time it gets done with the resting and everything else, is it going to be dry? Is it going to be bland? There's a lot of things that it takes to get a brisket right. The number one thing is going to be patience. It takes a long time, and you don't got to do a whole lot for that long stretch of time. Today's a good day for me because I got a grip of things to get done around the house here and stuff, and I'm going to use the Weber Smoky Mountain cooker, which doesn't require a whole lot of hands-on. Once you get that thing puffing, it'll go for hours and hours and hours. So that's going to free me up to get things done while I'm still making this beautiful piece of meat. I say beautiful, but this is really a crappy brisket. I didn't spend much for it. It doesn't weigh a lot. It's not a big, you know, it's a full packer, but it's not a big piece of meat. It's about 8.5 pounds. Usually I'm cooking 18 pounders. But we're not going to eat all that meat, and so this little guy's going to do the trick for me. And it's a low grade, you know, it's not choice or prime. And I do that because the harder it is to get done good, if you work on this kind of stuff, you can cook anything and make it good. So sometimes I purposely buy these really bad grades of meat just so I can have that challenge. I love that challenge, and I work on it a lot. And when you're able to master this kind of stuff, you can take wild game, you can take a lot of hard to cook meats, and you can make them really, really good. So let's get on with it. I'll show you what I do to prep this thing, and then we'll start talking about what we're going to spice it with. Okay, so the first thing I do on my brisket, if you look at the very top here, there's this fat and silver skin right here. This is the flat, what we call the flat. This is a muscle that runs right here, and it's being bound to a whole different muscle here that we call the point by a thick layer of fat, and that fat just holds those two muscles together. And so I'm going to start here on the flat, and I'm just going to remove some of this silver skin and some of this fat here because I want to get spices on there. And I got to be real careful because I don't want to cut a lot of meat away, and especially since this isn't a very big brisket. But that's what I'm doing here, just getting just underneath that meat to get that silver skin out, so I can expose the meat. Okay, so I got most of that off of there. It's not the prettiest cutting job. This is not a competition that I'm cooking for. In fact, the end product here is not going to be something that I would cook in a competition and turn in. This video is not about competition barbecue. The sanctioning bodies in these contests, you know, they give us a very specific mark they want to hit. On brisket, they want it to stay together. They want to be able to fold it in half without it breaking and crumbling, and at the same time still be tender enough that you can take a bite out of it. That's what I would turn in to try to get a good score in judging. But if I want to feed somebody some outstanding brisket, we're going to do it a little bit different than that. This thing should get in your mouth and just melt, and it should be juicy. It should be tender. It's a whole different piece of meat when I'm trying to feed somebody some good barbecue. So that's what our target is here. So let's talk now about the fat. This thing has got fat all over it. I got this. This is the outside of that vein I was telling you about that runs in between these two muscles. I'm going to take a little bit of this off. I'm not going to take much of it off. I need that fat to be there throughout the entire cook to help baste this meat and keep it from drying out, because it will dry out. And once you get your brisket dry, it just doesn't rehydrate right. You never get it back. So I'm going to leave a lot of that there. On the back side, we have this fat cap. Usually I'll trim it down a little bit, but I prefer to leave a lot of it on there. Looking at this, it's already fairly thin. I mean, it's thicker on the edges. I got like probably a 3/4 of an inch right here, but it doesn't run that way all the way across the flat. This is a thin flat, so I don't really want to take it off. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to let as much of it render as it can. Some of it will not render, and that's fine, because I want it there for the entire cook, like I said. And then we're going to trim it off after the cook, okay? So that's all I'm going to do as far as trimming this. You don't have to go trim crazy. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we spice this up. Simple. I'm kind of going with a Santa Maria style profile. As far as spices go, the flavor of the beef is going to be the star of this show, but we're going to give it some love. And so we'll start with the black pepper. Put plenty on there. It's a big piece of meat, and you really want the flavor to get down in there. There's going to be a lot of drippings come off of this, and we're going to capture as much of that as we can. This spice that we put on the outside of this is going to be part of that juice that we capture. It's going to influence what that juice tastes like, and we're going to use that to help keep our brisket hydrated. So just get it coated all over with plenty. Okay, plenty of black pepper there. A little more, why not? And then we're going to go with the granulated garlic. Now this granulated garlic and onion will, it's going to blacken out there on that long cook. It's going to make this thing kind of dark, and if you were going for presentation, I don't know, maybe less of it. To try to get a different color on the meat, but this is all about eating. This is going to all be about eating. Again, liberal with the spices. Pat it in real good. And this thing's such a fatty piece of meat, I didn't have to smear anything on here to help this stuff stick. And as always, let it sit in this spice for a while. I mean, if you can do it, put it in the fridge overnight. I would not put the salt on it until, actually I wouldn't put it on, I would bring it out of the refrigerator and set it on the counter and let it come up to room temperature. And at that point, that's where I would really kind of put the salt on, because you don't want it pulling all that moisture out of your meat. And that's exactly what salt will do. And if you're going to have it marinating for 3 or more days in the refrigerator, yeah, absolutely put the salt on, because then it's going to, you know, if you do that, make sure you wrap it up like with some plastic wrap really tight, and then keep it in a pan, because it's going to pull that moisture out. But if it sits that way, typically over 72 hours, reverse osmosis, look it up. I'm not going to go into getting all scientific, but that happens, and basically what it means is your meat is now pulling that moisture back in, and along with it, it's going to be pulling in the flavors of the essence that's on the outside. So also plenty of salt. Okay, so we got the chimney going, and I've loaded up the pit with charcoal that has mesquite chips incorporated all through it. And then on the outside here, we're going to start with cherry wood. I have some mesquite also, but I've said this before, applewood, cherry wood, fruit woods are really good on long cooks. They won't overpower, like some, for example, mesquite can overpower your meat if it's in it for too long. So we're going to go with that. There's mesquite chips through there, so we're still going to get that mesquite flavor, which is really good on beef. And then we'll talk a little bit, we talk about processes, so let's talk a little bit about that. You can see here at the bottom of my pit, there are these vent holes. There's 3 locations for these vent holes, and so the process of cooking barbecue without electronics. When we put these hot coals in here, it's going to start picking up steam as it starts to light these other coals, and the barrel's going to be on top, and there's a vent on the very top of that barrel, and this fire is going to be needing oxygen. It's going to want oxygen to keep burning, so it's going to start pulling air in through these vents in order to keep itself going. As that happens, it's going to warm this barrel up, and the smoke and heat's going to start rising to the top like it normally does. As the barrel warms, the chimney effect's going to happen. So now you're going to actually have the vent on top literally drawing the smoke and heat through the pit, and that's going to help these down here start to breathe a little bit better, and that's going to be really important. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Really important to this process, though, and it's also important that you understand that process. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit, going back into the process here, about wood and the role of wood in proper barbecue. And those of you that are gas cookers, I want you to listen. I'm not here to bag on anybody, but the strong-headedness of people like me, this is where you can learn something. I've seen people take these little smoldering boxes and stuff and put them inside of a gas cooker, and they get smoke inside of there, so they get smoke flavor in their meat, and it's like, this is just as good. It's honestly not, and I'll explain why, getting into the process. When you're just smoldering wood, you're creating heavy particulate matter, and you're coating the outside of your food with that. So yes, it gives you a smoke flavor on your food, but not necessarily throughout the food. And the stuff is bitter. It can be bitter, put it that way. Wood is unique in the process when it comes to barbecue, because it belongs to both sides. It belongs to the ingredients, and it belongs to the process. It provides the heat that cooks your food, but it also provides a chemical atmosphere that flavors your food. And the type of wood you're using is going to be just like an ingredient. It's going to change the way your food tastes depending on what you're using. That's why we are going with a milder smoking wood. Also, the way this wood burns, the temperature that it burns at, and the ventilation, that's going to change the type of smoke that you're cooking with. That's a chemical process. I don't want to go into, again, getting all scientific about it. But when your pit's breathing properly, you get a lot less particulate, smaller particulate, and a different mixture of gases inside of your pit that influence the flavor of your meat when you're cooking it. So it's not just about getting smoke on there. You know, it's really about getting the right kind of smoke on there. It's going to be key that you put your meat on a wood burning pit at the right time and not too early. Okay, it's time to dump this chimney in there. I'm going to put it right in the center. You see I put a little pit in the center there so that it can burn its way outward. So we got some good hot coals that are going to start this burning process. We're going to stick the barrel on there. Then the lid. Okay, so now we got this whole thing put together. We got to get it up to temperature before we put our meat on there, because we don't want all that heavy soot that we were talking about and that particulate matter just settling on our meat and making it bitter. So I'm wanting to see this particular pit, I want to see it get up close to 200 degrees, around 200 degrees before I put the food on. And at that point, there should be really coming out, you know, the smoke should be coming out of the vent super hard. The smoke should be white with maybe a blue or a purple tint to it. Once you got that going, then now you know you're getting the right kind of gassing inside your pit to get that really, really great flavor barbecue. So we're gonna give it a few minutes for that to happen. It'll take as long as it takes. Remember, I always say that. When you're going to be feeding people barbecue, if you're trying to keep some kind of schedule, cook it and hold it. We'll talk about that later also. I'm trying to cover all these things in this video, at least touch on them. There are things you can go back and research and, you know, get more details on them, but I'm just going to bring them out there, talk a little bit about them, and keep moving forward. So right now we're approaching 150. Once it gets up around 2, it should be kind of steaming pretty good along there. So, you know, it takes on its own, it creates its own environment inside and just starts going. So we're just waiting on that, and we'll get the brisket out here. We are at the 200 degree mark. It's time to go ahead and get this beautiful brisket on the pit. So I'm gonna lay it right on the rack here, and I'm gonna put that fat cap up so that as it's cooking, it will help that fat to render and run down and help baste the meat. So we're gonna start this way. No water in the pan. I want a dry environment inside right now. I just want to get a good smoke ring inside of this brisket. Put that back on there. And so we'll let it ride this way, and it's really a visual thing for me. You know, when I feel like it's ready, I'll flip it over, let some smoke kiss the other side of it from a different direction, and then we're going to put it in a pan, and we'll talk about that also. So it's going to be a little while, so this is where you got to have the patience. Almost forgot, but I'm going to insert a heat probe into the thicker part of this brisket. Turn it around here. Okay. All right, it's time to get this guy into a roasting pan so we can start capturing the juices off of it. Gotta be careful, I got my plate there. There we go. All right. Okay, so right now the pit's running at about 275 degrees, which is right where I want it, and the inside of the meat is at 164 degrees. I have an alarm on here set to notify me when it hits 180, and that's when the really heavy collagens and stuff inside of the roast will start to break down and start to render. I want to see this thing get up over 200 degrees, exceed 200 degrees, and I want it to hold there in that temperature range for a while everything inside renders out. That's what makes the meat tender. And on a brisket, it's got to be for a little while because there's a lot of stuff in there that's just really, really tough. We got it in the pan. It's going to start capturing these juices. Once this thing gets up, probably another, I'm gonna say about 170 degrees, 175 degrees inside. If I feel like it's taken on enough smoke, we're gonna add a mop, which is just a simple bouillon that I make, into the pan, just a little bit on the bottom. That's why it's sitting fat side now, down right now. And then we'll go ahead and we'll put foil on top, and that's gonna help push it, you know, into those higher temperatures a little bit quicker, and it's gonna help to keep the moisture inside the, how would you say it? It's going to be inside that roasting pan where it's foiled, so that you have that high humidity environment that helps to keep that meat moist while it tenderizes. So that's a really kind of a key thing. There's other ways that you can make that happen with wrapping them in foil or tightly wrapping them sometimes in butcher paper to keep that environment inside. So we're going to let it ride. Going to get some other things done until we hit that 180 degree mark, and then I'm gonna take a look at it. Okay, the internal temperature hit 180, and I'm looking at it. I want this thing to take in some more smoke. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the lid back on, and then that ought to do her. We are at 197 degrees internal temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and add the mop. This is really nothing but beef bouillon made from a powder. And I'm just going to add a little bit in there like that, so we have moisture. And then we're going to put some foil on there. Seal it real good. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and cover it up, and we're going to let it ride, keep a close eye on the temperature, and this is where we start tenderizing. Well, the meat thermometer is telling me that we're hitting 210 degrees, so it's time to get this dude off and get it rested. The brisket is off the pit. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to open this up and let it steam out a little bit. Keep in mind this resting period is really important. This thing is still cooking. It's not where we want it yet. It's not at that tender point that we need, but it's gonna, you know, it's got so much heat inside of it right now. It's gonna take it a while before it actually rests down, and this whole time that it's resting, it's gonna continue to cook and to render. And so this is all part of the process we were talking about. And I can't tell you how long this takes. Every piece of meat is different, and every day is a different day. So we will, I'll let it steam out, so I'm going to go ahead and put the foil back over it here, and I'm going to let it sit here. I'm going to wait, I think, about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to stick a thermometer in there and see what kind of an internal temperature we have. I want this thing I want it to take its time resting, you know, maybe an hour's worth of resting. I want that temperature to just slowly start working its way down to, you know, maybe 130 degrees, somewhere in that area. I'm going to preheat a holding oven at 150 degrees. So once I get down to that rested temperature, if I've got just the right meat, what I think is good, perfect. You know, I can put it in there and let it hold. If it's not quite there, I'm going to let it go ahead and sit in there, and maybe I'll crank the oven heat up a little bit just to, you know, give it a little more, but I don't think it's going to need it. It's very seldom do you ever have to do that. Never a good thing when you do have to. This is going to go a long time in here, and it's going to continue to cook. It's going to be great when it's done. I can already tell by the smell. I'm getting excited, in case you hadn't noticed. Okay, this dude is completely done. We just gave it about a 2-hour rest. It took a little while for it to come down. Even being a small piece of meat was kind of surprising to me how long it took this thing to really wind down to where it needed to be. It climbed up to right around 220 degrees and it stayed there for a good 15-20 minutes, and that was a very, very slow ride back down to where. Alright, let's get into this bad boy. Okay, so here's where the point's at. This is where the flat comes up. You can see that fat layer right there. So we're going to go ahead and just separate the two. Then we're going to flip this over and we're going to go ahead and get rid of all this ugly fat. This part of the cap that was on there. And look what's inside of there. That's beautiful. So that's your brisket point. Here's the flat. Same thing. Get some juice on it. That's beautiful. Okay, so that concludes my brisket cook. All in all, took about 10 hours. That had a very, very long rest period. I had it in 150 degree holding oven for about 2 hours, and so, you know, even being a smaller piece of meat, it still took a long time to get it where it needed to be, but I nailed it and I got it right where I wanted it. I'll show you some pictures of it here, some close-ups. I kind of chunked it up different ways, hoping that I would be able to show you the level of tenderness and how much moisture was left inside the meat. You rest it the right way, then you're going to have some really good leftovers. If you don't rest it at all, you're going to have something dry that you're going to be probably feeding to the dogs. So take a look at this. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I got more goodies coming up for you, and we'll just close this out with some close-ups of the product. Thanks for tuning in.